Imagine you're sitting on a plane and enjoying a happy flight. You're enjoying a flight from Japan to Paris, and you imagine yourself being so lucky because you just won a Coca-Cola competition and you get a a trip to Paris, and you feel very lucky and you happily enjoy your sleep and you wake up. Then suddenly, breakfast is served and the passengers get omelets and you happily eat the omelet. But after that, you start to get food poisoning. You start to feel sick and you start to vomit and you start to do some weird and uncomfortable things. This is not a fake and made up story. This is a real story of how a Japan airline got some passengers, so much passengers to get food poisoning, and here's why. In today's video, I'm going to explain the story of how a meal just made around 100 passengers on Japan Airlines plane sick and get food poisoning. Now let's get into this story. A Japan Airlines plane from Japan was going to Paris. It was going to stop at Anchorage, Alaska, then go to Copenhagen and in Denmark, and then go to Paris, which is its final destination. The flight would last around 20 hours, and the passengers will happily reach there in the end. The first flight from Japan to Anchorage went smoothly. The passengers were sleeping, but in the Anchorage flight, as they were going to Copenhagen, things started to change in a grim way. As the passengers were starting to wake up, they want breakfast. The first meal was a sandwich which went smoothly, and the second meal were ham omelets, which is the meal for today. So, as the crew were serving omelets to the passengers and they happily ate, the pilots, however, liked to order dinner first because they were not doing much work. So they liked to order steak as a dinner, and they ate steak first. So, as the passengers were eating the omelets happily, one started to do something weird. Took out a bag and started to vomit. Immediately after that, the other passengers started to feel sick, vomit all over the plane, and vomit all over. Their faces turned green, they started to get diarrhea and cough and get sick. And the crew were shocked. How did this happen? As the passengers were going to the toilets and banging on the doors and pooping their pants and getting some diarrhea, they were feeling super stiff and uncomfortable. This is nothing to laugh about. I just said poop their pants, and that is nothing to laugh about anymore. This is a serious case of bacteria. So, as the crew were about to report to the pilot decided to land an emergency landing inside another early city, and luckily they landed around several minutes later. And as the passengers were sick and started to go out and get medical attention, things weren't going out very lucky anymore. It was starting to get grimmer and darker, and people were shocked. The families of the Coca-Cola competition that won started to feel lucky to feel sick. They felt horrible and they felt terrible. They had to get medical attention, but there was one problem. Inside Dutch, only the medical Dutch doctors only spoke Dutch, and none of them spoke Japanese. So they ordered some Japanese restaurants to quickly translate them, and as they started to do medical attention, they also Alaska State Security of Food decided to measure the food and test out what caused that. Many people and researchers suspected it's the omelet that they just ate, which is very true, and here's why. Now let's dig into a story of this meal of the omelet. An omelet was a ham omelet, and it was a normal ham omelet, of course, except it wasn't. It looked like a normal omelet, but inside are millions of bacteria that are contaminating the omelet and that can cause food poisoning at any moment to, well, the passengers. And here's why the ham omelet had bacteria. Let's back up into the story. As the omelets were making, 3 chefs were designed to make the omelets. One for the first class, one for the second and third class, and one for the others. So, as the first class chef made the omelets, around 360 of them, it was starting to get weird. First of all, he had 2 bandages. And there's some cuts in the bandages that contained bacteria that could harm the food, which was the very reason why, as they checked the chefs. And as the first chef picked on the ham was also contaminated because of the cuts. The bacteria started to leak in the ham omelet and soon started to touch the eggs in the omelet as well, starting to contaminate the whole omelet. Then it was starting to refrigerate for around 18 hours, which is the normal hour limit. But what they didn't know is that they didn't do it in exact time properly, an exact temperature. The temperature needed was 40 degrees Fahrenheit, but this was 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and they kept it in the whole hours, making super many bacteria to grow and contaminate. Plenty of time so that they can munch. Oh, look, here's a piece of bacteria. And they started duplicating and even more further contaminating the omelet. While it was pretty slow and steady, though, if the refrigerator was kept cooler, then that wouldn't have happened. But after that, it was also heated. But the heat can prevent the bacteria because the bacteria already duplicated and became much stronger so that they can even duplicate more. And finally, they were served. That was the story. So, what went wrong with this? Firstly, the chef that made the first class meals and the first class meals and the first class passengers were all sick. But the second class and the third class weren't because they were made by different chefs. Just ignore them. But the first class passengers weren't feeling so lucky because of the chef. If the chef didn't have reported to the manager and said that there was some cuts, then the manager would have said him to take off them and replace it with more delicate ones that are more stronger, that could protect the cuts from leaking in the bacteria that could get into omelet. So the chef thought that wasn't such a good idea, but he still didn't tell. He thought it was just no more simple and he could ignore it, but it wasn't. It was a type of bacteria that was dangerous. Its full name is, let's call it just PAF, but its a deadly bacteria, and it can contaminate a lot of people at once with just 100 food poisoning. Moreover, 100 amounts of them could get food poisoning, and that was way more because of the duplication of the bacteria. After that, the refrigerator, the bacteria started to duplicate because they can duplicate. Well, why should it do that? If only the refrigerator was even colder and was 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the nice limit, well, they could have fixed it. Only one, and finally, as the heating, they must heat some more because of the freezing due to the delay. But they didn't, and so the bacteria were already strong and could duplicate even more, making it super contaminated. And that led to food poisoning, which is not good at all. So that is why you need to be more careful. In a lot of more airliners, people have and researcher stations have decided to look for more airlines and test out their food. And they look for shocking. There were a lot of contaminated things in the food in the airlines when people weren't noticing. So they quickly fixed, and soon, luckily, we have delicious food, but it's also safe to eat, and no unhappy meals are served again. This is the lesson of Japan Airlines and why a meal just took down the first class passengers of this huge Boeing airline. So, that is the end of my story. If you find this story special, I'll make more ones like this, such as, and my channel, Young Teacher Alex, is to inform a lot about education. I also have a Facebook channel that reviews a lot of books and gets books as well. It's Puffin's books, but anyways, it's the end of this story, and thank you for listening.